Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. This is Kathy Bennett Santos, and I'm here today with our Blog Talk Radio Women Veterans Speak to recognize National Suicide Prevention Week and some of the challenges that are part of, I believe, a important system of issues that may contribute to unsuspecting behaviors caused by the judicial system. My name is Kathy Bennett Santos. I am the founder of the National Alliance of Women Veterans, and we are celebrating National Suicide Prevention Week here. And the discussion will be just around some of the important topics in this five-part Jubilee should be brought to a different level of awareness. We want to talk about how the judicial system, some of the inner workings of our government may not have enough considerations in their procedures and processes for protecting the rights of the disabled community. And let's just talk a little bit about the contributors to mental illness that may be exacerbated within these government platforms. Today, I just want to just introduce, which will be having ongoing conversation around the judicial system, which would mean the courts, particularly law enforcement, and some of the other processes that first responders or the court system may not recognize some of the rights and privileges of veterans in particularly, but as citizens, I think this is something that should be an ongoing discussion with the rising levels of mentally ill and mentally challenged individuals in our country today. I'm going to read a little bit from the Department of Veterans Affairs and some of the statistics that they are reporting. There was a level of suicide that was so important and significant to bring this attention. I'm just really, really excited about where we are in the discussion, and excited I say that because there is a need for everyone to be involved in the care of their loved ones who experience any degree of mental illness, from adolescents up until adults, and many of them who have been challenged post-COVID and are in crisis today. And I do believe that it's important that we recognize some of the platforms that may not have a sensitivity to this particular population. So let's talk a little bit about the present state of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which has reported that there are 399 fewer veteran suicides from 2019 to 2018, and 7.2% overall decrease in the age and sex adjusted veteran suicide mortality rate in 2019 as compared to 2018, and the unadjusted suicide rate for male veterans decreased 3.6% in 2019 for 2018, while the unadjusted suicide rate for female veterans decreased 12.8% in 2019 from 2018. The number of counts in 2001 rose almost 50%. From 2001, there were 29,580 suicides. To 2019, 45,861 is reported in 2019. And the veterans are counted, I guess they have a breakdown here on the overall population. I think they're saying here in this particular report at veterans, which I do want to just take a note here to say that when the VA does its studies, they incorporate so many different populations in its study that it's really hard to see where exactly the veterans population and the demographics that are within the VA, where there's a certain specificity for recognizing the impact of combat, military, and veterans-related activity. So here, as I tried to break down in reading this, it does state that veterans accounted for 5,989 of these, and in 2019, 6,000 veterans committed suicide, and that total is just amazing. It is just amazing when we're talking about suicide here for our veterans population. It rose 55% to 125.6% in 2019. That is unacceptable. Let's talk about why veterans are committing suicide and see where the VA is creating a certain screening, and talk about what some of their diagnosis process are. One of the issues that I find tremendously impactful was the psychosocial distress screening tool. It was a scientific tool to kind of identify what characteristics were occurring in veterans that may have already been diagnosed with mental illness, and how they were being processed based on the behaviors that they may present within the VA system. So there was a screening and assessment on those behaviors to kind of find out where they are in communicating viable markers, I'm going to say, for those particular traits and characteristics to help the VA assess where intervention, mediation, help, support, whatever strategy to stop the suicide. I myself have encountered many veterans who had threatened suicide on social media. And some of those conversations were very disturbing because many of the veterans were distant. Sometimes you did not know where they were in their very heightened level of the crisis that we were experiencing. And oftentimes they had outreached to the VA and had been denied appointments, or mental health appointments, or whatever connection that there be with another professional to help them to minimize any potential threats of suicide. And I find that to be a continuing concern for me. So we want to talk about how does that factor into the judicial system. So we have these various levels of them where the diagnosis of mental illness or disabled or other federally protected class that identifies some immobility or underdeveloped or intellectual development challenges with individuals who may be part of the system for court proceedings, whether it is in a plaintiff or the defendant or whatever role that there is. In that space, there must be some consideration for who they're talking to with regards to what propensity they may have for whatever mental challenges may exist. Saying that because as I was researching across the country into these various systems of the judicial system, I find that there is a huge omission for veterans, disabled, and seniors, which are all federally protected classes in the United States of America. So as I try to bring some attention on this matter, I'm going to try from several different perspectives over the next few series as I move forward here. But I wanted to begin with the veterans population because I believe that is probably the largest population where you may find a certain demographic diagnosed with mental illness post-combat or related to military sexual trauma or some of the military or veteran status. But I want to bring in some other dichotomies that may help understand some quality of life challenges where the VA may have an omission as to how they are listening to some of the veterans' concerns that compound themselves, the alienation, some other withdrawn isolation that within that space, that veteran somehow will have other experiences. And sometimes that experience could internalize in a way that suicidal ideations can result. And also, let's talk about the pharmaceutical side effects that oftentimes can cause suicidal thoughts. How do I know this? Because this is one of the conditions of many adverse psychotropic medicines, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully we will get some experts in to how these different aspects of mental illness and the mental health assessment may impact a person's life, and wherein we can find some layers to the suicidal thought process, and how can we minimize that? Where does the conversation begin with a person who has become so isolated and withdrawn because of the routine responses they've been getting when asked for help? So they become so isolated because of the expected response of a door closed or somebody hanging the phone up or some other level of cannot communicate beyond that. They isolate themselves, become withdrawn, and in that internal thought pattern process, other behaviors start to manifest. And how do we deal with that? How do we identify with that? And then what are some of the challenges that the professional community, whether it is the judicial system or whether it is other professional communities, how do they interpret those roles? How do they interpret what their responsibility is to that person with that classification or who is symptomatic in their presence? What is their responsibility? And I think this is where we are going to start to draw some serious concerns in that community as we begin to outreach across the country to how some of these systems are responding within these particular platforms to individuals with a proclivity to suicide who have mental health challenges. That is a huge problem. The medical profession, the psychological, the psychiatric profession, and as well as the legal community, they must be trained and educated on that added demographic when they're looking at the level of responsibility that person has in responding to these environments, whether it is criminal whether it is in a civil matter, whatever that matter is within that particular court system, or when that particular individual is encountering another professional encounter. And this is a very complex topic, and I'm limited in how far I can go with the medical component, but I do know on the very basic level on the assessment and the sociological component for ethics and what should not be done, the regulatory and compliance and following the guidance and authority under the ADA and other discriminatory platforms of the Department of Justice. I do believe that there are real assessments that can be made at a glance by these professionals that should warrant their actions be modified and, when necessary, adjusted to that individual who presents in that manner. So I'm going to consider this to be a key part of our future dialogue and look to other professionals that will continue to add to the conversation to bring some validity to it. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Yes, so much thank you for that little brief intermission there, just to gather some final thoughts here as we come into the conclusion of the first of this five-part series, National Suicide Prevention Week. The VA has, Department of Veterans Affairs, they have ongoing campaigns and outreach on these various occasions to recognize suicide or other challenges in the veterans community. However, the last report that I can see that I was able to research has to do specifically to 2021 National Veterans Suicide Prevention Annual Report, Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, VA, United States Department of Veterans Affairs. Some of the information that they have included into this particular report is beyond 5 years, which in the research community could add a challenge and compromise the validity if it has such an antiquated perspective enclosed with the today's statistics. So there's a mixture of information here that makes this very difficult to analyze by the VA. From 2001 to 2009 area time period, there are so many transitions and evolution of progress in where we've gone that the data, in my opinion, the way it is presented, presents a huge challenge for anyone to analyze what the present state is, which I think is significant post 9/11 and post, I'm going to say, the most recent episodes where the data was collected, analyzed at 22 suicides per day. And I do believe with the evolution of healthcare investigative, I'm going to say, revelations by the OIG and the challenges that has been presented to the VA where changes were implemented or modifications to assessment and screening and thus the treatment of veterans should provide a different level of statistics 2022. And I do not see a particular study beyond 2019 that would make this information any more challenging for anyone that could assess what those what impacts have been made into the screening processes and the diagnosis processes for helping to resolve some of these. But we're going to continue to have this conversation, and I don't want to complicate the topic here with regards to National Suicide Prevention Week, but I do believe that we must talk about the various dichotomies that exist, which are layered from the individual that connects to the medical professional. Somewhere in between, these particular challenges must be identified and rectified so that they can be addressed properly. And we're going to bring this conversation about the judicial system and some of the roles of our legislative components and the judicial staffing that interact and particularly exacerbate the veterans who encounter these platforms in a legal system. What responsibility is it for the veteran, and what responsibility is it for that professional? Is it a responsibility to anyone? But I do believe that the Constitution has a very clear directive there on the treatment of disabled, those who are mentally ill, and those who are disabled. But let's talk about seniors. Seniors, veterans, and the disabled as a federally protected class within the court systems is a very, very important part of the population that should be the mediator, professional, social worker, whatever that person is, to navigate those systems. And it should not be so complex, whether it is through access, through accommodations, whatever is necessary to ensure that that individual has equal access to that for getting the services that they are seeking, or in the cases of the judicial system, sort of for having the kind of guidance through those procedures that they can have a understanding that fair treatment will resolve. You can't base a decision when the particular process is so flawed and there's such a lack of access that the outcome can be justified. So I'm going to continue to talk around this topic and to make sure that we are aware when these challenges do exist as human beings. The humanity in our systems must not be so mechanical and robotic through automation that we should expect individuals who have a lesser assignment because of their ability to incorporate an ability to navigate through these a very, very, I'm going to say, robotic system. Computers do not talk back. Oftentimes, seniors, disabled, and veterans may have some levels of challenges, and that needs to be a consideration when they're being invited into these systems and there's no offer of mediation or assistance to help them navigate. There should not be an assumption that they are aware or knowledge of or should know or any of that. There has a responsibility to the decision makers there, to those in authority, to ensure that there is equal access and accommodation for this particular population. So we're going to continue to talk about this, and hopefully that we will have over the next 3 to 4 series professionals that can help us to cover some of this in a very realistic way through their experiences, whether we have lawyers who actually identify with the criminal population, or the labeling of criminals, or the labeling of those who enter the court systems. I'm looking to have a professional who will add to the conversation on a very basic level without identifying any particular courts or individuals, but certainly just to have a very generic conversation about how we can implement change at the growing population of mentally ill, mentally challenged veterans who are in these systems. We must raise the awareness and get help where they're needed, and certainly to make sure that these professionals are aware and educated and trained in dealing with these individuals when they encounter them into their courtrooms. So thank you so much for joining the Women Veterans Speak. This is Kathy Bennett Santos, and I am so delighted to be on the air today to talk about this on National Suicide Prevention Week. And we're adding some discussion to the judicial system, and we'll be adding some other systems too, where the professional role of those who encounter the veterans are educated and trained as a outcome to what we're able to do through this particular forum. So thank you so much for joining us, and we are looking to hear any comments, and please join us next time.